Is the long run the only thing that really matters when it comes to marathon success? Hi, I'm Coach Kyle of Freedom Running Club, and I'm asking this question because for a particular reason, and the answer is absolutely not. You cannot just get there because of your long runs. Although if you see a lot of people's training plans and hear them talk, they'll think that basically running 3 20-mile long runs and that's all you need to run a marathon. And it's a really kind of a misnomer, and it's a key training gap that we usually see with people who are coming to us maybe from more of a AI-based training plan, or maybe something that they found online, where there's a huge emphasis, too much of an emphasis, on the long run. The long run is just a tool to success in your marathon, but it's not more important than the totality of everything else you're doing. One thing I really try to hammer home with my athletes is, we're not the product of our long runs only on race day. We're the product of the totality of all of the training, the recovery runs, the workouts, the recovery, the fueling, the everything else, the stress management. That's what we are on marathon race day, and not just that long run. So I think that people really put too much of an emphasis, and they try to get so much done on that long run day. They think it's going to cover up maybe some ills that happen elsewhere in their training. And for this training gap video, we're going to be talking about an athlete we've only worked with for about 2 months named Caiden. When Caiden came to us, it was about a month before his marathon, and he had this goal of breaking 3 hours in his first ever marathon. We're now working with him to run a Boston qualifying time in his next race, but that was the goal for his first ever race. Caiden is a younger athlete. He's 19 years old, and basically, when he came to us, what we saw was what we see pretty commonly from people that are using an AI sort of situation to create their plan, or a plan that they just found online. There was so much going on with his long run and not a lot going on the rest of the week. Not that he wasn't doing nothing the rest of the week, but we would see 21, 22-mile long runs that he had done, and they were always workouts. The long run was always a workout. It wasn't just easy conversation pace, which I think that most people's long runs should be that in most cases. We'll talk about nuance there in a second. Every one of his long runs had pace work in it, a lot of pace work in it. So he was running 21, 22 miles, something like that. But the rest of his week kind of looked like 30 minutes here, 25 minutes there. There was some kind of workouts, no hill runs or anything like that. But essentially what we sort of said was, all right, Caiden, you're obviously really fit because you've been able to get to this point of the training cycle, healthy, but there's some key things that we can do here in terms of redistributing your miles and make sure that we're actually getting the most out of this. So there's a really interesting, there's some data that's come out on this, the idea that your long run in terms of time on your feet really should not be more than 33% of your total weekly miles. So if you're somebody that's out there and you're running a 3-hour long run, that means you need to be running at least 9 hours. 3 hours for the long run, you need to be running at least 9 hours for the week in order for that to make sense and have it not, the risk is injury essentially, because it's so much more time on your feet in that one day. Now, Caiden was also taking an off day the day before his long runs and a very short recovery run the next day. So what was actually happening here was there was so much time being spent preparing and recovering for the long run. And I don't say this to beat Caiden up. Caiden's, doing what he thought made the most sense and what he was hearing, what to have happen. And Caiden was super willing to change this, and it was really great to see, the growth that he had here. But essentially, if you're taking half your week to prepare for and recover from your long run, you've given up half the week for one run. And that just doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of long-term growth. And again, Caiden has a lot of goals of, running super fast times, qualifying for Boston, qualifying for other races, and just being a really, really strong marathon runner. So basically what we started to do was we took a lot, when he got to us, we only had, a few long runs left about a month before. We took all the intensity out of his long runs. He'd done a lot of that stuff. And we started having more separate, dedicated marathon pace workouts in the middle of the week. So like Wednesday, essentially. Separated enough because that's a higher mileage day to where it's not going to impact his long run. Took all the intensity out of the long run. He was still able to run 20 miles on that. We put that cap of 3 hours for him because, again, he wasn't running more than 9 hours a week. And then we started to add a couple minutes here and there. Those 30-minute runs on Mondays started to become 40-minute runs on Mondays. And there wasn't a lot that we could do in terms of adding a ton of intensity, again, of where it was, but we're having to redistribute some of those things. Move some of the miles, take the 22 miles, let's add a mile here on Monday, let's add a mile here on Wednesday. Let's take this intensity that really could be undoing some of the progress on this long run if you're adding too much fatigue, let's make this a separate workout. Let's redistribute everything. Let's not make that long run the most important thing in the world. Let's make sure that we're looking at the entirety of the week. So he went out there in his first ever race, the Queens Marathon in New York, and he ran 2:57 in his first ever marathon, which is just a fantastic performance for Caiden. And then as we got into this, we identified we've started to close this training gap. You know, we're not putting a huge overemphasis on the long run. What can we do now in the second training cycle that we're dealing with Caiden? We've just kind of added to that. You know, we've kept that marathon pace segment for most weeks, and again, I'll talk about the nuance of that in the middle of the week, but now we've added a new training stimulus. We've added specific dedicated hill workouts to his training so that he can have another training stimulus. And because we've added more miles all the way through, he's a little bit more durable. We're able to get those 2 quality workouts in during the week and a quality long run, and we can do a little bit more easy work during the week. And his marathon pace is really growing at a super rapid level from the testing that we put on him through his aerobic testing. So he's doing things like medium long runs, MLRs you've heard me talk about. So he can do a slightly longer run in the middle of the week. And what that's doing is it's building his aerobic engine. You know, it's spreading out the stress so that he can have proper adaptation. So it's not so much on that one day. Now, I do think that long run workouts have a place. I just don't think that they should happen all the time for most people. So what we'll do is we'll kind of sprinkle those in when it makes sense. If you have questions about when you might do a long run workout for yourself, you can ask those in the comments down below, or you can fill out the link for our training gap assessment. It can be something that we can talk about specifically, but doing them every single week just really means there's so much intensity on that one day and so much mileage on that one day that you're really probably spending way more time preparing and recovering for it. Take a look if you're someone that does that long run workouts every single week, and there are reasons why you might need to do that if you have a super busy schedule and no time at all except on the weekend, you're kind of adding to it. But I still think there's a little bit more ways that you can do it that are more efficient by splitting up some of these things when you can. And that's why, you know, that's what I do for my clients, you know, try to find the best way to do it. Even if you're a busy person who, you know, works 12-hour shifts, or you have kids or anything like that, there's definitely a way that you can make it work for you and close this training gap of so much on that one day for the long run that there's not a lot going on for the rest of the week. So like I said, I'm super excited. You know, Caiden is just thriving with this, you know, spreading out the intensity, spreading out the miles. We're still doing good long runs here as he's preparing for the Jersey City Marathon here in April. And I know he's going to go out there and run a fantastic time, but it really started with identifying this is the training gap. We are doing so much on this one day. How can we close that training gap? And Caiden's been amazing and really receptive to these changes, and he's really reaping the benefits. 2:57 in his first marathon, and I know that he's got faster times in him. So again, if you have questions about your own training gaps and how they might be closed for helping to improve you in your next race, there is a link that's pinned in our profile. It's going to be in the comments down, the caption down below. If you have any kind of like general questions, feel free to ask them in the comments down below. But I'd love to sit down for a consultation with you and just kind of see what your training gaps are. So again, fill that out if you have any questions, and we can see how we might fill some of your own training gaps.